Ontario's housing programs will not keep pace with demand. That was the top line takeaway from a report earlier this month from the Financial Accountability Office of Ontario. With us to drill down on those findings, Peter Weltman, who is Ontario's Financial Accountability Officer. He's joining us from Ottawa. Hi.
Hi.
It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Nice to be on.
So when you set out to do this report, what did the Financial Accountability Office set out to find?
It was a report that was requested from us by an MPP. So one thing that's important to remember is that members of Parliament, provincial Parliament, can ask us to undertake work within our mandate, and this was one of those. And it was a request that came in towards just after what's fall of 2018, after the National Housing Strategy was signed between the province and the federal government. And the request was, so we have a new housing strategy, what does this mean? So it's a fairly broad question to answer. And what we did was we went about answering it by looking at the difference between the new strategy, which started in 2018 and went to 2028-29, and saw what the outcomes would be at the end of that strategy compared to what the previous 10 years looked like.
And what did you find?
So we found that, generally speaking, although the amount of money is going to increase somewhat, it's going to be on average about the same as it was over the last 10 years. We're going to see some dips, and because we had a period of spending growth with programs that were funded partly through the cap and trade program, which was canceled. So overall spending has basically in this new program replaced expiring agreements from previous programs. So that was one. Mm-hmm. Two is the number of households that were going to receive additional support, or additional households that receive report. We're going to see more people actually being able to receive support due to the construction of the types of programs. But three was, at the end of the day, we will still have more households in core housing need, i.e. households looking for affordable housing, than we had at the start of the program.
You know, governments change, and when governments change, so do their mandates. So when you look back, how has the province's housing and homelessness programs changed over time?
So what you have here is different types of. Let's go back to the beginning. So really, you have two on the housing side, and the report breaks this out nicely. The report's quite large. It actually covers affordable housing and homelessness. So on the affordable housing side, you have two real types of housing. You have social housing, which was started up in the 40s, and those were units built either by contractors or by governments, and those are units available to households who they're called rent to income. So basically, they pay a certain percentage of rent, or rent as a percentage of their income, and they're about 30%, et cetera. You have an affordable housing piece, which are effectively subsidized rent. So builders who will build units and offer them at 80% of market rate. And there's a third piece, which is the Canada Ontario Housing Benefit, which is a subsidy that follows the family. And it can either be used to supplement rent if you're in an affordable housing unit that's still too expensive, or if you're in a unit and your income drops and you're at risk of becoming homeless. So that is a little more flexible program, and that's the one that's going to reach a few more people than in the previous 10 years.
So when we talk about people who are experiencing homelessness, how does the provincial government measure that number?
Well, that's a good question, because that's what we found in the report. The provincial government, this previous government and this government here, have both made a commitment to end chronic homelessness by 2025. We're not seeing that happen without some different policy measures. The province at the moment doesn't measure how many people or the number of people that are homeless.
So how can they know who needs help?
Well, precisely. That's it's not as simple as it sounds. It's difficult to measure homelessness, and certainly chronic homelessness. Folks are finding shelter wherever they can, and maybe in different places at different times. So it's not always easy to pin people down and count them. The government just released something, I think it was last week or the week before, a new protocol instructing municipalities as to how to come up with a different way to count homelessness. But clearly, if you're trying to end chronic homelessness, and we estimated in the report about 16,000 families every night find themselves homeless in Ontario. So if you're going to eliminate that, you obviously need to know what your population is first. and what some of the key drivers are as to what's creating the homelessness. And what we found in the report was homelessness is often created either by escaping from abusive family situations or if there's an addiction issue going on. So those are two key factors you need to be able to start to end homelessness.
Because even if you are experiencing homelessness, different communities have different needs, correct?
Well, that's precisely right. Now, we didn't get into that in the report, but I think it's important to keep in mind that, folks living in Toronto and Vancouver, which I guess we'll get to in a little bit, you have expensive housing, so there's going to be a harder time for folks to find affordable housing. But there's also homelessness in rural areas, and they're harder to count because they're in some respects they're hidden. I think if you talk to folks in those areas, they'll tell you that it's a much more prevalent problem than people will think to acknowledge, because they're not sitting out in they're not camped out under a bridge somewhere like you might see in Toronto.
You mentioned the National Housing Strategy. What is that?
The National Housing Strategy is a 10-year federal provincial program, and it's a $4 billion program over that 10-year period. Funded 2/3 by the federal government, 1/3 by the provincial government. And it's to provide funds to, as I said, to try to alleviate homelessness and to provide more access to affordable housing for families that need it.
So under that strategy, what does it commit the federal government and the provincial government to do?
So the government, the Ontario government, who is delivering this program, has said that it was hoping to be able to reach more families in need than they were under previous programs. And we found that an additional over the 10 years, by the end of 2027-28, 55,300 more households will receive support compared to 2018-19. But the other corollary to that is, while they will receive support, it won't be enough support to bring them out of core housing need. There will still be about 80,500 additional households in core housing need by 2027-28. I think you have to remember too, as the population grows, the population of folks who need affordable housing grows, as the cost of housing starts to get crazier. I mean, it's been crazy for a while, getting crazier. It's harder and harder for folks to afford affordable housing if they are in a low income situation. So that population will continue to grow regardless. Even if you're increasing the funding, you have to increase. If you're trying to you're trying to keep it level, you're still going to have to increase to account for that additional population growth.
But there is a little bit of good news, because some people will be taken out of precarious situations, correct?
Yes, some people will be taken out of precarious situations. And then we have something called critical housing need, where you are effectively spending 50% or more of your gross family income on housing, and you are earning a salary at what is basically described as the poverty level. So that Canada Ontario Housing Benefit is more targeted to folks like that, to help them either get out of homelessness, but more readily to try to stay in the home they currently have. So if the home is becoming more unaffordable, either through an income problem on the family side or maybe a rents have gone up on their side. So there's an additional benefit, or this new benefit, that is able to target those folks and help them stay where they are, which we see. That's the big difference, I think it's fair to say, between the old program and the new National Housing Strategy.
And what about municipalities? What role do they play in these programs?
So municipalities play a huge role, because they effectively deliver the social housing program. So they own and maintain the stock of social housing. They may not own it, but they are charged with maintaining that, with screening folks to manage the wait list and get them in, make sure those units are livable. They also help in the front end with screening folks and helping families who need help to get the help they need. So municipalities have a very, very large role in affordable housing.
So let's talk more about housing. How do these programs assess which households are eligible to receive support?
So there are many different assessments, but the one that we focus on in our report is what we call core housing. Well, no, we call what the CMHC calls core housing need. So a family in core housing need is a family whose lodging costs, whether it be rent or mortgage or combination thereof, are in excess of 30% of their gross household income, and or the house, the lodging they live in is not big enough to accommodate the family, and or the house they live in, the accommodation they live in, is not in sufficient state of good repair to permit them to live there. So it's in need of major repairs. So if anybody finds themselves in those situations, they are considered to be in core housing need. And what we'll see with this program is, while it will make a bit of a dent on the absolute terms, core housing need will still grow. And by the end of 2027-28, 735,000 families in Ontario will find themselves, excuse me, in core housing need.
And do you think the pandemic might make that number higher?
Our report didn't take into account the pandemic. There was a lot of additional spending that happened, certainly in the homelessness area, to help people who were in shelters to be able to spread out, or to relocate them to areas so they wouldn't be quite as contagious isn't the right word, but as readily able to spread the disease. So there was a lot of time and effort and money spent there, but that is a one-off, and that is not part of our analysis. Maybe the pandemic will surface the situation more broadly. Maybe more people would become cognizant of the homelessness and lack of affordable housing situation, because it was a fairly visible part of those were folks who were pretty badly affected by the pandemic, and I think that might be brought to bear a little more than maybe it would have had in normal times.
We have a graphic here that you provided for us. Sheldon, if you could please bring this up. And it's showing the percentage of households in core housing need in Canada and the provinces. So we're looking at percentage of households versus the provinces. On one end, let's start with New Brunswick at 7.3%, Quebec 7.5%, Newfoundland and Labrador at 8.4%, Prince Edward Island at 8.6%, Alberta 10.8%, Nova Scotia 11.4%. For the whole Canada, the average in Canada is 11.6. In Manitoba, 11.7. Saskatchewan, 11.7. And in Ontario, on the other side of the graphic, 13.9. And British Columbia at 14.6. Peter, can you explain where it is that we're looking at right now?
Yeah, so again, these are households in core housing need as a percentage of the households of the province. As I described earlier, by the end of the program piece, it'll be 735,000 households. So 13.9% of all households in Ontario are in core housing need. So they don't have enough income to pay rent at 30% of their income, or they're in a house that isn't suitable, and they're in a house that isn't suitable, whether it needs repairs or whether it's just not big enough. So I think what's interesting with this graph is that BC and Ontario are well above the national average. And it's not that difficult to figure out why, because Vancouver and Toronto are the two most expensive cities in which to live in this country by a long shot. Yeah. So if you're somebody who hasn't got a lot of income and is looking for a place they can afford to live, it's going to be, not only going to be hard to find something, but even if you're part of the program that provides a subsidy, like a 20% rent subsidy, rents are still so high. In many cases, they're out of reach of folks who would even be part of the program.
I should mention that your office doesn't make policy or give advice, but when you do look at those numbers, they're really concerning. Will the National Housing Strategy be enough to reduce the number of households in core housing need?
Well, that's the crux of the matter. So. And I think that's where maybe your panel that's following will be able to discuss in more detail. We can't get into the policy imperatives and the pros and the cons, but what we do is we provide the baseline. Here's what the program is, here's what's being spent, and here's what the outcome is going to be at the end of this program. And as I said before, the outcome will be, although more folks will have a chance of getting some assistance than they would have in the old program, we're still going to see more people in core housing need at the end of the program than at the beginning of the program. Now, if your objective as a government is to basically say we want to have more people getting support, well, this program will do that. 55,000 additional households will receive support under this program compared to the last one. If your objective is to get everybody out of core housing need, this program will not achieve that.
Well, something else that we should talk about is the affordability gap. What is that?
So that's a calculation that we did, and just to try to give people a sense as to the costs to the program of getting somebody, of subsidizing folks who are getting either the affordable housing or the social housing or the housing benefit, which might include a rent subsidy. So on average, folks who are in social housing or rent geared to income housing, who are by definition no longer in core housing need because their rent is geared to their income. The subsidy, those families are receiving a subsidy roughly $6,300 per year. So that's roughly what it costs to bring those folks into rent geared to income. Households who are in below market rent situations, so they're paying 80% of the market rent as an example, they're getting a subsidy of roughly $3,800. So, and as I said before, that doesn't necessarily bring them out of core housing need if they're living in very expensive accommodation because they happen to be living in a very expensive city. And there's a final piece here. Rent supplements provide households with about $4,500. So on average, what we call as the core affordability gap is about $4,000. So that's roughly the level of support that the government provides to folks who are in the program to give them some assistance.
With that being said, to what extent do these programs address the affordability gap?
Well, I think that so goes back to the subsidy. So if the affordability gap is $4,000, if you are a family receiving housing or rent geared to income housing, the subsidy you're getting is roughly $6,300. So you're well into, you're there. You've got your affordable housing you can live in. It's geared to income. It's costing governments around $6,300 a year. If you're getting rent supplements, it's costing governments $4,500 a year. So for the most part, you're there also. This is on average. Not every family is going to be in this situation. It's on average, and that's important. If you're living in affordable housing where your rent is subsidized, on average, you're not there. You're still paying more than you can afford, notionally for the house that you're in, even though you're getting some help through a rent supplement. So it's maybe not as unaffordable as it was. It's still considered to be unaffordable.
Based on your analysis, are any of these programs working at getting people into homes that they can afford?
Well, sure. I mean, all of the programs do work in getting people into the homes they can afford. I think the point is that, are they working well enough? That's always, going to be up for debate. So while we're going to see over 10 years, 55,300 households additional households are going to receive the support that they need to get themselves into some level of affordable housing. But, still half of those folks are still going to be in housing they can't quite afford. There's just going to be more affordable than it was before. Mm-hmm. So yes, more folks will benefit. Will they benefit enough to pull them out of core housing need? No.
And in your view, I know you can't give policy or advice, but obviously all of these things, all these numbers are all interconnected with the province's finances. Why is it important for us to get a handle on people who are experiencing homelessness and to actually track those numbers?
It's really important because there certainly are economic impacts to having folks who are homeless. And while our report doesn't go into those, there are many folks who do a lot of their research and spend a lot of their time talking about that sort of thing. But folks who may have other medical issues or family issues that have forced them into let's say shelters, there are costs being incurred to support them, both on the social support side, on the education side, on the medical side, and having a home gives a level of stability. There's lots of research there to show that if you have a place you can live, then it becomes a little bit easier to manage your way through the world. So they all do have long-term economic impacts. And if you have a lot of folks that need a lot of, social support, that does have a cost to the government.
Peter Wellman, thank you so much for your insights. We appreciate you making time for us this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.